Okay, so we were discussing on floods, and we have seen certain components uh, of floods and how do we classify all that, and we have seen why it is relevant in the first place, and particularly with respect to Indian context, how this is a very pertinent subject as such. And we have also seen certain statistics on how we have, in fact, we have reduced the extent of damage, particularly in terms of life, but the economic loss still higher. Okay, so we have the issue of that, and also we have seen what are the causes of floods. Okay, how we can differentiate between coastal floods, riverine floods, and the what do you call fluvial floods, which is because of the excessive rainfall that we receive in urban areas. Okay, and also we have seen how urbanization and land use patterns aggravate or complicates further in the flooding. And there are a lot of case studies that can be read, and some certain inspirations or certain guidelines can be drawn on how it can be how floods can be managed. And also, if we have discussed, though we have been taking some initiatives to address the issue of floods. We have seen how certain recommendations of the government is not being implemented, how it is causing an issue in terms of how do we protect the cities. Okay, and yeah, these are certain things we have seen. And also we said the measures can be structural. The mitigation measures can be structural, the mitigation measures can be non-structural, and there is a need for community to come together for addressing the issue of floods. And in specific, we have seen how India is prone, and we have seen different basins across the country, and which basin is predominantly getting flooded, and what is the reason, and so on and so forth. And specifically with respect to the Deccan region where we are currently situated, and we have seen how there's a difference between the kind of flood that takes place in the northeast and the kind of floods that takes place in the southern country. Okay, so we have seen how the change in terrain will also have an impact on the increased flood, and so on and so forth. And specifically, we did discuss a little bit on urban floods. How is it different from other forms of floods? And this is like I was saying, this is a new phenomena, probably a new phenomena that we are trying to address. Okay, so we were discussing on the urban flood management. Okay, and we did discuss about even though we take a lot of initiative, we should accept that there is some element of risk will be there, and we need to implement a number of strategies in together to cope up with this flooding. And also we need to have a good governance. Okay, who has to take decision, when they have to take decision, how quickly they have to take decision, and also plan and prepare the cities so that we have a better management of floods. Okay, and we have seen certain key points in how do we take that into consideration. Now what we will do is we'll quickly see certain ideas that is there on how do we manage the floods. Okay, and what are the steps that can be taken to manage floods, right from it's kind of a top down approach. Okay, we'll see what can be done at the regional level and what can be done at a small site level. Okay, so that is the intention, and I'll be showing some examples, theoretical examples on how it is done. These are lessons taken from various case studies, okay, and how and we have come to some understanding on how do we manage this kind of floods over a period of time that from the case studies. And the references that I'll be using is primarily taken from World Bank report on urban floods. Okay, I'll share. I'll upload this reference material in the classroom. Maybe if somebody is interested, you can just look at the details that is given in the report. Okay, of the first step, and also kindly remember whatever steps that I'm going to discuss is not in a linear fashion. Okay, so I have put based on the readings that I have done. It's not necessary that it has to be in the same order. Okay, but I have deliberately put certain things which are broader in nature in the first slides, and medium or city level intervention, and followed by building level intervention. Okay, so of the first thing that is recommended for mitigation, we are discussing on all these things under mitigation measures. Okay, what kind of mitigations can be taken for reducing the impact of floods? That is the intention. So one of the ideas that is discussed, or one of the point that is raised, is on having a vulnerability map for the country and the city for understanding floods. So vulnerability maps are based on two factors. Okay, one, the location of the elements of risk. What is risk? I think these words probably will time and again we'll be using, and we have been using risk, hazard, and vulnerability. Okay, so what is risk? The risk elements, like for example buildings, roads, bridges, settlements, all critical and utility infrastructure that may get affected, okay, because of floods. Okay, here we are discussing floods, that's why we are referring to floods. Otherwise any element, for example like building, roads, settlements, and infrastructure facilities that is prone to any disaster is defined as risk. And this is one component is needed for defining the vulnerability map. The second component is the vulnerability of those elements to different aspects of flooding. How much is the intensity of floods? Okay, what is the duration, and what is the velocity, and so on and so forth. Okay, so in order to define, or in order to come up with a vulnerability map for a particular city or so, what we need to know is, first we should know the building, the habitation, the settlements, the infrastructure facilities that we have, which are under risk because of floods. Okay, so this is how you define risk. Okay, let's say here in terms of flooding, these are under risk. Okay, so the second component is we should know about floods. Okay, and what is the intensity of floods, and the duration of floods, and so on and so forth. This, using these two parameters, okay, the vulnerability map for a city is prepared. Okay, and normally it is expressed as a degree of loss of resulting from occurrence of natural is measured as 0 to 1, where 0 it indicates lesser vulnerability, okay, and higher number indicates closer to 1 indicates more vulnerable to floods. Okay, and what are the components that is used for vulnerability mapping is the indentation areas and the areas which are natural areas which are supposed to take up the flood water. The second thing is, of course, the infrastructure facilities, okay, buildings, the land users, or all the habitations that we have, and so on and so forth. And third thing is on the socio-economic factors, okay, for example, whether it is a community which is equipped to counter floods, or is the community designed or planned enough to take up the impact of floods, okay, which means whether some kind of intervention has been done in terms of spatial planning, or some kind of flood mitigation measures are already in place or not. This also plays a major role in defining vulnerability map. So what do you mean by that? Let's say we said there are 2-3 components. One, we should know what is the flood intensity. Second, we should know what is the what are the elements which are under risk. Third thing is, where are we habited? Where is the habitation, and which is more in terms of socio-economic characteristics, where are people and how we are situated. So all three put together, okay, will be superimposed, and a vulnerability map for a specific city is prepared that tells us, okay, which area is more vulnerable, less vulnerable, okay, between 0 to 1. And why do we need this kind of map? So let's say if we have a warning that probably we may get flooding in another 2 or 3 days time, so we'll be able to prepare the cities. Okay, these are highly vulnerable areas, we need relocation of people there, or these are medium vulnerable areas. This area requires maybe additional mitigation measures, temporary mitigation measures, and so on and so forth. So this is one way of looking at how do we address the issue of how do we mitigate the floods. Okay, the second step that is defined is the flood risk map. Okay, in the first one we have identified which area is vulnerable. Okay, and now we are saying flood risk map. What is flood risk map? Flood risk map represents a spatial integration of hazard, exposure, and level of vulnerability. Okay, here we are just said which area is vulnerable. Okay, we have identified this is highly vulnerable, this is medium vulnerable, and let's say these are low vulnerable areas. This is the only parameter that will that is the only output that we are able to generate using this vulnerability map. Here vulnerability map is used as a base, and top of that hazard and also the extent of damage is superimposed on that, so that we get to know which area is risky, okay, which area requires more attention, and so on and so forth. Okay, so the effectively flood risk map is actually a combination of vulnerability map with flood hazard map, which defines, okay, these are the areas, risky areas, okay, where we need to pay attention. These are less risky areas, probably they can manage, and so on and so forth. So if you see NBC, okay, we have flood risk map, okay, associated with the document. I'll show you maybe at the end of the presentation. We have a map which talks about flood risk in India, and what is the extent of risk that is defined there. Okay, so that's the second thing. Third thing is when we talk about mitigation or planning cities and preparing communities for flood, one of the thing that is suggested is on an integrated approach required for management of flood. What do you mean by that? Whatever discussions that we are going to now will be under this terminology. Okay, integrated risk approach towards flood prevention. Initially also we have said flood risk management requires holistic development. Okay, we have said, I was just briefing some time back as well. It has to be looked in as a whole picture, and we should have long term and short term strategies together. And in specific, we have been repeatedly discussing this, that we should have both structural and non-structural solutions as an integrated approach towards making the city less prone to disaster, specifically flood, and it, of course, it applies to other forms of disasters as well. So there is an emphasis on integrated approach for preparing city for floods. Okay, when we say integrated approach means this of course includes structural and also includes non-structural measures. Okay, and both has to go hand in hand. That's how things has to be looked at for preparing cities to mitigate the floods. So if you see that under this, there are certain keywords that we can look into. One is flood prevention before the event. Okay, often it is structural in nature. Okay, threshold capacity, or the second one is can be considered as coping strategy. Let's say during the flood. Okay, what is the damage limitation during the event? And usually this is kind of a coping strategy. Okay, I'll explain each of it again. Let's just run through this. The third one is recovery phase. Okay, where we try to rebuild after the event. We do an assessment, and then probably we'll come out with some measures. How do we recover? Okay, and the fourth one is the adaptive capacity, where we try to strengthen our community for next disaster or next flooding. Okay, and we try to bring in some structural and non-structural measures. So before the flooding or before any disaster, okay, so one thing has to be done is the assessing the carrying capacity of, let's say, channels, carrying capacity of rivers, and so on and so forth. Okay, so what best we can do to prevent it. This is the first step. Second step is, okay, we have made our best efforts to reduce reduce the impact and prevent the flood. Even after that, we will have issue of flooding. How do we cope with it during the floods? What do we do? Okay. And primarily these are non-structural measures. Okay, in prevention, primarily it is on structural measures. Okay, we build check dams, we build structural measures, we raise the building height, we add let's say some landscape elements into the land. Okay, so infiltration capacity building, all that takes place in the first stage, in the preventive stage. Okay, and most of the time this is on structural measure. Okay, physically we do something. During the flood we can't do physically something. Okay, so we have to depend on non-structural measures. Okay, let's say for example relocation or coming out with measures to reduce the damage. Okay, how do we cope? How do we cope during the floods? Third one is, okay, we have taken certain initiative for prevention. Okay, even after that we had flooding condition. Okay, we did take some non-structural coping strategies. Coping is to cope up with, okay, to cope up with the disaster. Third one is okay, now flood has hit the community. How do we recover from it? Okay, and here again some of the post event is primarily on non-structural measures. Okay, we have to bring back the community for as usual, or if not better. Okay, normally they say build back better, triple B. So normally it's not building back to its original form, building back to a better form. Okay, so that tomorrow if we have another issue, we are at least one step ahead of it. So this is the recovery stage, okay, where again that's the emphasis probably will be on non-structural measures, coming out with insurances or building health, providing clean access to water, all that, bringing the community back to life. Once we have done that, in a long-term strategy, okay, we have to look for how do we build back. Here it is there, build back better. Okay, triple B. So how do we make sure that tomorrow if we are hit by another flood, we are actually one step ahead. Okay, so that's the overall idea. So first prevention, then during flood some non-structural measures, post recovery recovery stage, again non-structural measures. Okay, after recovery, coming out with some structural and non-structural measures, so that tomorrow again if it is something, some event, we are actually prepared for it. So it is a kind of a cycle that keeps going round and round, and there's always scope for improvement. Okay, no city is safe, no from any kind of disaster. We are actually probably, let's say we have an intensity of one flood intensity of X, let's say 1 unit today. Tomorrow we can't say that the intensity of flood will be 1, so it may be 2. So we had planned for only 1, and now we are hit by the intensity of flood 2. Okay, so this is a cycle, and this will keep continuing, so on and so forth. Okay, that's a broad idea on how do we approach the integrated flood management issue. In the report, the mitigation measures are also discussed in a top-down manner. Top-down manner means from large scale to smaller scale. Okay, I have put the mitigation ideas that is discussed also in the same manner as well. First one is on the catchment scale. Okay, what is catchment scale? For example, let's say this is our city. Okay, and we have low, let's say this is a discharge point for the city. This can be river, or this can be sea. If it is a coastal city, this is a sea, and if it is a river based city, for example Vijayawada, the excess water or the catchment area is finally runs into a river or the sea. Okay, so if we have to take certain measures at this scale as well. At catchment scale, okay, we have to take certain measures that is specified here. What happens here? For example, let's say these are some of the indicative things that is mentioned. Let's say this is where we are habited. Okay, this is the first point. That's about where are we living. And flood storage dams. Okay, we have seen, let's say these are upper lands, and if we receive a lot of rain, or also from excess water that is from the other region reaches through this land, and ultimately it has to reach the river or the sea. Okay, so what do? We try to we try to store this water, okay, for the use of the city, and excess water is let down to reach out to the end point. Okay, so this is also one way of one of the way of flood prevention, because we can regulate how much water can flow, okay, and in a controlled manner. Okay, if let us say if there is no control on this, probably we may have lot of water, lot of excess water, flood water reaching to passing the city and reaching to the shore. Okay, that is one way, one intervention that is discussed. Other thing at broader level, groundwater management. Okay, this also need to be addressed. Okay, wetland and environmental barriers. Okay, for example, specifically on having mangroves and natural ecosystem closer to the river beds. Okay, so that the water is gradually or in a controlled manner reaches to the end point. Okay, even if you don't have this, these are some issues. This will lead to river based flooding. Okay, why? There will be sudden discharge of water to the end. Let's say this is river or the stream. This sudden discharge of flood can also cause riverine floods. Okay, we have discussed about this river based floods. So we need to have this kind of mangroves or environmental protections at this scale, catchment scale. And of course we should also have early warning systems. Okay, and this I think I have not discussed this. I will discuss this when we discuss about cyclone, because it is all going to be the same. Okay, so what is early warning system and what is a warning system and how it works and all that, I'll keep this discussion for later. And of course smaller, here we have discussed about the dams. Here other barriers, okay, at a smaller scale, okay, which helps in preventing the city from getting flooded. And other things, at a catchment scale, we should have an emergency plan in hand. Okay, and also we should have some temporary shelters, ideas, and identification of locations where we will not have flooding. All that has to be done at this scale as well. And of course, on economic point of view, insurances and so on and so forth, all that is also to be considered at this scale. And of course, having forest and infiltration areas, larger infiltration areas. Normally we discuss infiltration at a city scale or at a building scale. We say that how much area is paved and how much area is unpaved, but now we don't discuss this at a larger scale. We need to have this kind of infiltration areas in a catchment area as well. Okay, so this is first scale. Some of the measures has to be taken at a catchment scale. Okay, so the what is in catchment area? Catchment area is if we receive water, if we receive rain, okay, all the water that is received in this area will ultimately reach to one outlet, okay, one or multiple outlets, but it will have culminating point. Okay, so all the water, all the entire area will be termed as one the catchment area, which means all these slopes or the natural terrain, all that will lead to one point. Okay, and there are different catchment areas. There's a way of identifying catchment areas. There are methods for extracting catchment areas, all that. I have requested my PhD scholar, maybe when she presents her work, she will also tell how do we identify catchment area, what is the method of doing it. Okay, so this is the first step. The second step is, this is at a city scale. Okay, we have taken certain measures at the catchment scale. What do we do at a city scale? Okay, what kind of measures can be taken at a city scale? There are certain scales. There are certain measures that will overlap on from catchment to city scale as well. There are certain specific measures that are exclusively taken at a city scale. For example, of that is land use planning. Okay, and we have discussed in the previous discussion class as well. Land use plan will help in identifying zones which are most vulnerable to or most risk prone to floods. Okay, and we'll be able to identify areas within the part of catchment. Okay, this is actually a part of catchment. This is the entire catchment area. Okay, and now what are we discussing is this area which is city. Okay, this is we have catchment here. Okay, it's a big area, and the water actually passes through this catchment area as well. Okay, that's why we are concerned with this. So it's actually a part of the catchment. Okay, within this part of the catchment, we should be in a position to identify how do we plan out this particular zone. Okay, which are within this habitable area, which zones are less prone to floods. Okay, and which zones are highly vulnerable to flood. So flood zoning map is required at this scale, so the city scale, so that we prepare our cities for flooding. And of course we should have evacuation plan. Okay, here also we did discuss little bit on emergency plan. Okay, in case of severe disaster we should have some means of moving out of the city, right? And we have heard many times that the probably you must have read as well, there is a cutoff. The city is cut off from the other. Let's say there is another city here which is relatively less vulnerable, but this city is vulnerable. Okay, and maybe because of excess rain and damage, sometimes the city remains cut off from other city and other resources. So this is also a problematic situation where we may not have access to the city itself. Okay, we have to wait till we get an access and prepare. So emergency plan is required at this scale as well. Of course, at the city level, we should also know how do we evacuate the city, what kind of plan we should have. The last time also I told you, normally we have seen evacuation plan in the buildings only. Okay, normally when we talk about fire, we say that okay, there is a fire route, you have to take this path and leave the city, leave the building. And similarly, similar applications are done at the city scale as well. Okay, so in case of flooding or in case of specific disaster, what is the evacuation route or evacuation plan that we have? Okay, that's the second thing. Third thing that is to be done at the city scale is having flood defenses. Okay, maybe in terms of barricades and in terms of structural measures taken. Okay, for example, let's say this is the water. This is the water that is not visible here as of now. Let's say this is the water part. Okay, we are concerned with excess water reaching this river and flooding into the cities. Okay, so deliberately we have to take structural measures, flood defense systems, so that the city is safe. And of course here as well, early warning system is there. We will when do we announce that there is an high water level, and when the citizens are alerted that you have to prepare yourself for some kind of disaster and so on and so forth. And floodgates, okay, for example, let's say in addition to the structural measures that is taken, okay, barriers and other floodgate system, so that let's say this water does not reach us, okay, after this point. Okay, let's say this is running water, okay, and we can prevent, okay, the water further reaching the streams. Okay, so floodgates can be installed or are installed to prevent excess water reaching the vulnerable areas. And also there is a mention of something called conveyance and storage facilities. What do you mean by that is the water moves along like this, okay, and sometimes deliberately the route is designed in such a way that it takes a longer path and then it reaches to the end point. Why? Because the longer the path, okay, it takes, okay, the intensity will get reduced, and as a result we'll have more, we are buying more time in this case. And also sometimes we have storage facilities as well, okay. In case, let's say, if the excess water is there, we store some of the waters, and then excess water is discharged into the river or the sea. Okay, this is in addition to this is, I think this we should not compare with the reservoirs. Okay, this we should not be compared with reservoirs. These are small ponds, water bodies that are deliberately created within the city areas to store water. Okay, and yeah, it is mentioned here, the lakes and so on and so forth. So these are some of the steps that is recommended or that is taken at a city scale. Okay, city scale, what can be done. Okay, so this is at a city scale. Third one, if you go down further, okay, what do we do at a neighborhood scale? Okay, now we are just scaling it down further. Okay, we have come to a smaller area where what steps can be taken, and how do we address the issue of flooding at this neighborhood scale. One of the thing that is discussed is on sustainable urban drainage system, okay, which includes green roof, swells, and so on and so forth, which helps in percolation of water into the ground, and it is kind of we did discuss a little bit about how mangroves work, right? It helps in reducing the intensity of flood water. So similar things can also happen at a smaller scale, that is here. Having greeneries will help in reducing the flow of water and also help in percolation as well. Storage we had discussed at city scale, at catchment scale, which is nothing but dams and reservoirs, and it can also at a city scale. It happens at a city scale, which is the open surface level storage facilities. It can be parks and lakes and so on and so forth. It can also happen at a neighborhood scale, okay, underground system, a tank, and so on and so forth. This is also possible. And also, since we are discussing at neighborhood scale, some of the other elements are added. For example, solid waste management. How solid waste management is related to flood? See, for example, let's say if we are started dumping things in an area which is sensitive, which is supposed to act as a barrier for flood. Okay, so because of these unnecessary or unintentional human-induced activities, okay, the way these barriers should work may no longer work. Okay, so for example, plastics and so on and so forth, it may block the waterways, right? So having solid waste, proper solid waste management plan is also considered as one of the mitigation measures for prevention of floods. Okay, building design and measures. Okay, and of course how the buildings are designed, whether we have elevated surfaces, or whether we have taken care of the low-lying areas, creation of stilt and raising the platforms and so on and so forth. Specific intervention that is done at a building level, so that the building remains intact. Okay, and we have taken enough care to check the topography of the land where we have built. Okay, whether our foundations are strong enough to take up the water. Okay, all that has to be considered. And of course here again, flood conveyances, for example the route. Okay, how the even after that water has to move through the neighborhood, and it should reach river or the sea finally. So whether we have a correct channel and we are not disturbing that natural channel and so on and so forth has to be checked. And of course these kind of environmental buffers that we discussed here is applicable in catchment areas. This is applicable in the city scale as well. This is applicable in a small pockets as well. Okay, wherever there is a connection between water and land. Okay, this area is very important, and we have to protect that natural environment that will act as a flood mitigation measures. And of course deliberate measures in terms of creating some structural interventions to prevent excess water reaching out to the inhabited areas. And some specific community levels. Okay, we are identifying some of the areas which is a safe zone, or having some common facilities in case of any disaster, common assembly point and so on and so forth. All that is possible, and identification of safe zones within the neighborhood. And here again you can see land use planning or flood zoning comes into the picture. Again we did discuss at the city level. Of course this is done at the regional level also. Okay, we do have regional plans in place just to check whether natural systems are kept in order. City scale as well, we do have master plans that will help in checking whether we are actually not disturbing the natural terrain and so on and so forth. That's why we have land use plan. And this can also happen at the neighborhood scale, where we have specific zoning. What is zoning? Zoning is part, right? For example, let's say this is a master plan that we have. Zoning is applicable probably for this particular parcel. Okay, so how zoning regulations are applied here and how this development has been generated. So there as well we will check, there will be a check on whether flood mitigation measures are taken into considerations or not. Okay, so this is at a neighborhood scale. Then of course at a building scale, what can be done? Appropriate design measures, okay, taken first of all to raise the building levels, okay, and preventing the water coming in, and if it comes in, how do we take out the water and so on and so forth. Okay, there is specific design elements mentioned for doors as well in case of flood. How that particular doors will act as a act in preventing the water coming into the buildings. Use of water resistant materials Okay, flood storage we did discuss at neighborhood scale also. This comes into picture here as well. Again, here within the buildings, okay, which are safe zones, which where do we how do we access to a let's say rescue team and so on and so forth in case of disaster and so on and so forth. And again, the sustainable urban sustainable urban level design interventions, okay, to prevent, okay, the flooding water inundated into the habitable areas are taken care or not has to be checked. So drainage system is one which requires this kind of understanding, and this is one of the topic, okay, that is done by that is read or researched by architects and urban designers. How do we come out with sustainable urban drainage systems? Okay, so these are specific to urban level issues. How do we come out with drainage patterns which are exclusively designed for urban areas to address the issue of floods and so on and so forth? And of course, following the building regulations which are defined for highly vulnerable areas. Okay, and of course this is also very, very important, and we have seen many cases that the death has occurred because of shock. Okay, there is the electric pole has fell, and the death is not because of the flood, it is because of the shock and so on and so forth. Okay, so utility also has to be checked. Okay, how it is managed, how it is addressed. Okay, so in very quickly, so there are certain things that can be done at a catchment scale, there are certain things that should be done at a city scale and at a neighborhood scale, and of course at the building scale. Okay, so these are relevant, and these things has to be kept in mind when we design buildings, or when we prepare the cities or neighborhood for mitigation of floods. This is one word that I have used when I was explaining about the floods. Conveyance and storage. Okay, in the context of flood risk management, the purpose of conveyance is to provide a route to take potential water away from the risk area. Okay, so if you see here, deliberately we are extending the length, flow length. Okay, so that is conveyance, and sometimes traditionally this is actually a traditional method where, for example, let's say this is the actual water flow direction, and water is actually taken into a larger part, some of it is stored, okay, and then led to discharge. Okay, so this is actually a traditional system that is very effective, and it is still in practice as well. Okay, such systems often form part of much broader water management system, including in fact now for example, let's say even this can also be discussed. We store water. Okay, we store water, and we use that flow. We use that flow energy, the energy that is generated because of the flow of water from potential to kinetic, right? So for generating electricity as well. So this can happen here as well, and in a smaller catchment area as well. Okay, that's first thing. One is designing the route, deliberately designing the route. Second one is storing the water. Okay, maybe for drinking and maybe for other purposes. for generating electricity and so on and so forth as well. Okay, and this is again taken from the same, just to explain, if the water is let to flow in the same way, okay, maybe the high flow of water can be observed here. Okay, so in order to prevent, in order to protect the city, okay, some barriers are built here, okay, so that there is no excess of water coming in. However, the water is actually channeled through certain way, okay, deliberately taken through certain way, and certain facilities are made so that the water is stored for some time and then it is just discharged into the end point. Okay, so this is a deliberate measures of conveyance and storage system to mitigate, to act as a mitigation measures for flooding. Other thing is done on modification of rivers. Rivers means the flow directions of, not flow direction, the flow length of the rivers. Okay, increase flow area. Okay, alter the line. Okay, it is flowing in this way, and now it is going to flow in a longer path. Okay, protect the banks from erosion. Increase the height of the banks. Okay, so that these are certain measures taken. Okay, I'm not talking something which is very theoretical. These are some of the measures already taken in cities across the world, and based on that, some of the best practices are listed. Okay, this is one such measure that is listed. Rivers are also modified by maintenance procedure such as dredging, cleaning of vegetation, and debris and silt cleaning. Okay, this I have also discussed when last time as well. We have to prepare the cities every time before monsoon. We have to prepare the cities. So that means, let's say this channel is supposed to carry X volume of water, okay, during floods. If pre-monsoon, maybe the flow of water is not consistent, okay, what will happen? There will be debris settled, okay, and in fact in the cities it's more of solid waste. Okay, we dump solid waste, and we throw other things that end up here in the flow direction of water. That has to be cleared off. That is also one of the measures that is mentioned here. Okay, the you can see this the conveyance and the storage system here as well. Okay, so this is deliberately, the route is taken in such a way that there is a long path is taken, so that there is no one flow. There is a reduction in the intensity of the floods, and also smaller pockets. Sometimes it is deliberately done, and sometimes it is a naturally occurring thing that we have to address and take into consideration. Other thing that is discussed in the mitigation is protection of banks, river banks from erosion. Okay, this is also one of the important thing. Around the world there are many systems of erosion protection, many involving local natural materials and traditional techniques. Bank protection forms part of local environment and must be appropriate environmentally. Structural elements has to be used in order to protect that facilities. What are we talking here? We are talking about the point where water and land meets. Okay, be it at neighborhood scale, be it at building scale, be it at neighborhood scale, be it at city scale, be it at a catchment scale. In all that, there is a connection between water and land, and in between there is an ecosystem, natural ecosystem that exists, that has to be dealt in a proper manner. Okay, that's what is discussed, and we have also seen there are many things that will be there. Protection using natural materials may involve establishing vegetation, grasses, shrubs, okay, all that is possible, and it is done in a natural way as well, and it is also done in an artificial way as well. We have seen probably gabions, okay, so which is nothing but we will have structures like this which is filled with metal structures filled with stones and so on and so forth. That can also be used. Increasing the height of the banks, okay, so this is a good example of why do we increase this height, so that the indentation does not take place, or indentation does not happen within the because of this, okay. This is also synonymously used, okay. You should not get confused when you heard about leaves and dikes, okay, so which is synonymously used for the structural elements that you see here, okay. This is the structure, dikes. Other things, flood storage, okay, and I have just said, see here I have been saying that the storage is only natural, okay. This can be naturally formed, or we have deliberately created this open spaces, open surface storage area for water, okay, or it can be in case of disasters. There are case studies where stadiums, airports, and major infrastructure facilities of the city has been used as temporary storage for excess water, okay, so that it does not run into the cities, okay, so that you hold water for some time, so that the actual river channel or the flow of water is maintained, and this excess water is released later on, okay. So this can also happen in that way, okay. When we say flood storage, this can also happen that way. So storage occurs naturally in catchment area, for example within floodplains, okay, or more locally in ponds and lakes and so on and so forth. This is what the image that I have shown. Artificially, this can also be done. Artificially created storage facilities include flood storage reservoirs, okay, in case of catchment area, that is dams, retention ponds, okay, we have seen maybe these are you can also call as retention ponds, okay, and deliberate flooding of farmlands, okay. These are measures, okay. In order to protect life, we can do anything, right? So these are certain things that is done and tested as well. In urban areas, letting the water into some infrastructure facilities like playgrounds and so on and so forth, in some cases parking areas as well. Why do we do all that? Is to reduce the burden on the carrying capacity of this particular channels, okay. So this can also happen this way. Drainage system, this is one of the major thing that needs to be addressed. Urban drainage system needs to be able to deal with both wastewater and stormwater as well, minimizing the problem of flooding, okay. Urbanization has a significant impact on this drainage pattern. For example, rainfall where we don't have permeable surfaces, okay, excess water will reach out to this pipe, okay. So that needs to be addressed. So in developed countries, okay, they have two drainage system. One is exclusively for the waste and one is exclusively for the stormwater drain, okay. So this is also possible. This can also be done at an urban scale. Surface water management, we have discussed about this. Concept of surface water management is considered to all aspects of localized surface water flooding, including urban drainage, groundwater and runoff. So this can be temporary management, and it can be long-term management of surface waters. Temporary management is, for example, letting the water to flood farmlands, or storing the water for some time in major infrastructure where people are not using it. Okay, all that is temporary. Long term can be having retention ponds and that reservoirs at a catchment area, so on and so forth. Okay, and the other mitigation measures includes infiltration and permeability, increasing the permeability in urban areas. Okay, so this is known. I don't have to explain why this is very essential and so on and so forth. So permeability has to be increased in urban areas so that the runoff is reduced. So if you don't have, let's say, I think this is a good example. If we have lot of area for infiltration, okay, lot of water goes in to the infiltration. Okay, infiltration, lot of infiltration take place, and as a result there is a reduced runoff. Okay, ultimately this is the amount of water only that has to reach the river or the sea. Okay, however, if we don't have this infiltration, if the infiltration is reduced, you can see the diagram here. The infiltration is higher, here the infiltration is lesser. Okay, and what happens as a result, the runoff is increased here. Runoff is increased. That is the problem that needs to be addressed in urban areas. That can be significantly improved through infiltration. And infiltration can include soak pits, specifically designed trenches for infiltration. It can be vegetative surfaces, swales, and it can also include pavement, which allows water to infiltrate. And other mitigation measures mentioned is groundwater management. Okay, how do we increase? Okay, how do we ultimately increase this will reach to the groundwater, right? So how do you make sure that enough measures are taken so that water reaches to that level? Groundwater flooding. Groundwater flooding is actually, for example, I have written here, groundwater flooding is most likely to be a problem in areas that are low lying and have water bearing rocks. Okay, for example, here let us say we are just in a very simplistic manner we are saying increase the infiltration. Suppose if the strata is like we have mentioned in the previous slide, let's say the underneath surface is rock. Okay, we have a rock bed, and of course this will not allow a further infiltration of water, right? This will block. So and of course if that is blocked, the water will not further infiltrate. So if we have that kind of issue, okay, we will have something called groundwater flooding. Okay, so that also needs to be addressed. Land subsidence. I think I have shown one example. During earthquake, some part of the land will subside. In the sense, for example, let us say this is the topography, and we have water underneath. Okay, and these are different layers of earth. Because of earthquake, what will happen is there will be a movement of the land here. Okay, and this displacement will change the topography here, and this will subside as well. Okay, this will the soil that is here will no longer have the same strength as that of the land that is here. Okay, because of water, because of continuous exposure to the water, and it loses its strength. Okay, so as a result, that particular land will subside. I think if you remember, or I don't know, there will be a building which looks like it has some submerged in the earth. Why that happens is because the soil does not have the carrying capacity that it should have. Okay, and I have used a word called liquefaction. Now probably you will be able to relate. This is actually called liquefaction as well. Rainwater harvesting is something, okay, that is deliberately done, and you all do it in your site plan exercise, even in the building level as well. That is also one of the mitigation measures that is extensively discussed. Building design, okay, respecting the codes and coming out with specific design measures at a building level is also one of the mitigation measures that needs to be taken. These are some very simple thing. The mitigation measures can start from here, which is preventing water from reaching the doors to cities and the dams. Okay, so there is a range of mitigation measures that can be taken and discussed. Okay, in summary, we have something called coastal flood, riverine flood, pluvial flood. Okay, what is coastal flood? What is the issue with the coastal flood? Soil erosion. Okay, in case of river, upstream. Okay, all that will happen. What we need to do is we have to clean the silt, and we have to clean the trench, and so on and so forth. In case of pluvial risk, that is excess rain falling in urban areas. Okay, what we need is more sophisticated urban drainage system and rainwater harvesting system to address this issue. Okay, so these are certain things. Specific in case of coastal risk, what is to be done? Pumping station, coming out with dikes, barriers, physical barriers, okay, storm barriers, flood walls. This can be done at a coastal flooding. For river-based flooding, okay, idea is to slow down the flow of water. Temporary and semi-permanent flood barriers, property level protection measures can be taken. Permanent flood barriers measures can also be taken. Okay, and at the urban level, again, the idea is to slow down the water reaching. Temporary barriers or permanent measures can be taken in all aspects. Finally, how do we put everything this into perspective? In the beginning I said we prepare vulnerability map, we prepare risk zone map. Okay, so after identification of these are the areas which are risky, a number of steps have to be taken to reduce the risk. Okay, which can include zoning, which can include identification of area, which area can be habitated, which area need not to be habitated, which area to be protected from construction, so on and so forth. All that happens at a zoning level. Okay, this can be done at a regional catchment level as well. This can be done at city scale level as well. This can be done at a neighborhood zoning level as well. Okay, that's one thing. Second thing, at the building level, we have specific building regulations to be followed. Okay, for vulnerable areas. So strictly following the building regulations and so on and so forth. Early warning system, this has been coming quite often. When do we alert the citizens, and what kind of system we should we have, and how do we prepare the communities during the disaster? All that is one thing that we should have. Engagement and awareness campaign. Okay, making, for example, I would say this subject is also satisfying this engagement and awareness campaign as well. Now you are aware, getting to know that what is flood, what is earthquake, and what is the kind of damage it will create. Okay, and improved drainage system specifically in urban areas, so that this can be the issue of urban flood can be reduced. Structural defense system can also be should also be increased, integrated to mitigate the urban floods. Okay, so whatever we have been discussing so far has some of it is structural measures, some of it are non-structural measures put together. Okay, so this is the summary slide where we can say that initially we had identified this is the risk zone, and a number of steps has to be taken so that the risk is actually reduced. So we have not eliminated. Okay, you can see the residual risk is there. In the last class we did discuss we should accept that even after taking all this there will be some risk. Okay, some risk will be there. Okay, so that is what is being said here. Okay, I think this is it. That's all I have for this topic, and I'll share the reading material for this as well on